So I'll hand it over to Evan. Evan, you ready?
I am ready. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for signing in with us and coming to hear David and Tristan talk. I'll keep my introductions brief so that we can get right to them. I am lucky enough to have known David and Tristan. David for many, many years. We met when I was living in New York and we're kind of fellow scrappy collectors, always looking for the next good deal, and fortunately didn't fight over the same image too often. But we're always talking auctions and dealers and looking for the next fun thing. And just have always had a great relationship around photography. David's collection has always been thoughtfully cultivated and around a number of engaging themes. And some years ago, he entered into a conversation with the Irish Museum of Modern Art, which you'll hear him refer to as IMA. And he has promised his collection to IMA and has started giving his collection to IMA in a notable relationship between an active collector and a major museum. And has had a number of shows there too. So the one that we're going to be talking about tonight, Northern Light, is the third show that David's collection has had at IMA. And I will leave it to the two of them to describe that more deeply. You don't need an intro from me for that. Tristan, Tristan, I was trying to remember where we actually met because it was not through David. We met somewhere else, but
we met in Milan.
Is that right? When we were reviewers?
Yeah.
Oh, that's right. We both did portfolio review at a festival in Milan, which was quite fun. But then realized that we ran in many of the same circles and knew a lot of the same people, David included, and have had a lovely friendship since then. So it's lovely to include you in this on its face, but also because, as I mention every time, as awful as the pandemic has been, I think the fact that we can do things like this with you in the UK and David in New York and us in Pittsburgh we wouldn't have thought to do it 2 years ago, and it's lovely that we can. So really lovely to have you. And I will quickly mention that while it's not specifically the topic for tonight, Tristan is the co-curator of something called the Insight Project, which I will read from their website, which is insightproject.com. It supports photographers who strive for social and political change through their work. And so he's been very active in finding work of the kind that is in David's collection, although he hasn't been working specifically for David's collection. The Insight Project has been his focus, but it's an amazing initiative from a private collector that I encourage everyone to go to insightproject.com and take a look. But with that, I will hand it over to you, Tristan, and look forward to talking to you both on the other side.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Evan. Thank you, Casey, and thank you, Erica. And thank you, David, for asking me to be involved in it. So we actually thought we'd try and make it as much like the experience of seeing David's exhibition in Dublin as possible. So in a few minutes, we're going to do a short video of the exhibition and then turn to the exhibition catalogue and use that as the basis for the images, which we'll talk about. We've compiled a lot of images. We really want to get through as many as possible. Just to give you guys a good sense of what's in this exhibition and what's in David's collection. Mm-hmm. As Evan said, this is the third show of David's collection. It's at IMA. The first time you've really delved into the Irish element of your collection, but maybe you'd to tell us a bit more about
this exhibition is called Northern Light, and sort of looks a little bit at the Troubles now, which is the Troubles that occurred between 1969 and 1998 in Ireland, Northern Ireland particularly. And we're focusing on that because we're about 50 years on, and also it's 100 years since partition of Northern Ireland. And it's a time to look at what was done in that period. And also to look at Ireland in a different way, because first you look at Ireland with the beautiful photographs of the beautiful green hills. And then we start thinking more, also as the collection has evolved, to think more in the abject, and also to think what's happened in Northern Ireland, because that's a very important part of Irish history. You can't really separate the two, Ireland and Northern Ireland. And so this became a project which I started working on several years ago. And actually the first photographs, unrealizingly, were from Rosalind Solomon, with photographs of children in the Troubles are from 1989. And that was when I was particularly interested in photographs of children. So the Troubles, to me, has a focus on how children are affected by the Troubles. And that's, you'll see as you go through the photographs, how that is illustrated. And it's sort of an important concept, because I am a pediatrician and I specialize in the treatment of children with rare diseases. So that's something that I'm quite concerned about. So that was one of the things that occurred. And I think also we're bearing history to what happened. And I think it's also that is an important element, working with the photographers who actually were there, bearing witness to the actual Troubles. And I think that's important. And so we've actually had the opportunity to work with many photographers during this time. So it's been a really learning experience. I thought I would just put one quote. I don't want to really talk about the Troubles directly politically, but I thought it would be useful to have a couple of quotes, and one now and one when we talk about the map. So this is from Robert Key, Ireland. This was a series on the BBC in the early 80s. And I thought this was interesting in the introduction. When the Troubles started in Northern Ireland in the late 1960s, it took most people in the world by surprise. It was bewildered them ever since. This is largely because for most people who don't live there, the late 1960s seemed to be the beginning, but the years of violence and suffering which Northern Ireland has been experiencing are simply the latest events in an old story which began long ago. Some people think it is dangerous to go into Irish history because by looking into the old Troubles, you may aggravate new ones. But as a historian of Ireland, Dr. A.G. Richley replied over 100 years ago to people who made the same charge then. A knowledge of the truth is never dangerous, though ignorance may be so, and still more so in that half knowledge of history which enables political intriguers to influence the passions of their dupes, misleading them with garbled accounts of the past. Runs true today, of course. So,
Can we go into the video?
Let's listen to, yeah.
Right.
So this is the, okay. So this is actually the video of the actual installation in the museum. So actually, I haven't seen it because I came to Ireland in September last year with the photographs for the show. And I worked with Sean Cassan, the curator, and we selected the location and how the hang would occur. But as I was there, Ireland went into lockdown, so I didn't actually get an opportunity to see the exhibition in person. And actually, the exhibition is still in place. So the exhibition will actually be up on the walls of IMA for about a year. It's one of the longest running exhibitions, unfortunately, which nobody has seen, but it's just opened a few weeks ago again, so people can go in and see it. And here, this is two photographs. There are many photographs here, which we won't have time to talk about, but you'll see the exhibition is divided into 4 rooms. And we look at many themes in terms of memory, in terms of conflict. And particularly, we look at the photojournalism by many of the photographers we will talk about, who have been in Northern Ireland, who spent time in Northern Ireland during the Troubles, and produced these bodies of work. This is a photograph by Abbas of a funeral in 1997, just before the Good Friday Agreement. Here's the last room, and this shows you the dense installation of photographs here by many of them, magnet photographers, also Gilles Kronn. And we also have a photograph here by Arthur Siegel, which you can't really see, but it's the Rights of Assembly. I mean, just to give you contemporaneous photographs from that period. So I look forward actually to seeing it. I'm actually going to Ireland again, hopefully in August. So okay, that's the end of the video.
I think a good moment as well to mention the amount of work that's in the collection and the show, which was not shot with the intention of being seen on a gallery wall and behind glass in a frame, and was shot with the intention of being there to illustrate the news and be in newspapers and magazines.
Exactly. So a lot of the photographs, I worked directly with the photographers to have them printed, because a lot of times these photographs don't exist beyond the press prints that were originally produced. So the photographers often I would be able to work with them, and they would go back and reprocess and reprint many of the photographs that we're seeing here today.
Okay, so let's get going. I'm going to share my screen, and format's going to be up to, as I said, I've used the PDF of David's catalogue from the exhibition. I'm going to show you double page spread and then each individual photograph as we go along.
So this is the first page of the catalogue, and on the left you see this photograph. Actually, the next page you'll see is this photograph by Ursula Schulz-Stromberg. It's called Der Azar, and it was this is photographed from 2005, and Der Azar is actually in Syria, but at the time of Der Azar, which is the site of the Armenian death marches which occurred between 1915 and 1916, this was in the Ottoman Empire, and in this location several 100,000 Armenians died. So this is bearing memory. It's a memory of the site of things, and this is something important in terms of photography, to jog the memory of locations and what happened on this site. Actually, I was remembering this when I looked at Joel Sternberg's photographs, because he's also did a very important photograph on the site of the Murrah building explosion in Oklahoma. So this is very important in terms of memory, and that is a key element of these photographs.
I'm going to go right. We're going to move into Ireland, and that's going to be the focus of the talk. As you said, the kind of classic photographs of Ireland, of green, gorgeous green hills.
Exactly.
But we're going to take it beyond that. We thought, David, didn't we, that it would be a good idea to just give a very, very brief
geography lesson.
Geography, yeah.
So this is on the left is the map of Ireland, with Northern Ireland shaded in sort of tan color. So another quote, just important, because this border was actually introduced on December 6th, 2021. So we're nearly 100 years since partition. The history of modern Ireland begins on December 6th, 1921, when, under the treaty concluded between the British government and the IRA leader Michael Collins and his colleagues, the foundations were laid for Ireland to be divided into two separate areas of sovereignty: that of the new Irish Free State, which later became Ireland, which covers 26 counties, known as of Ireland's 32 known counties, and that of the remaining 6 counties of to be known as Northern Ireland, which was a devolved parliament and of its own, but under the overall sovereignty of the British government at Westminster. So they remained in the United Kingdom.
And the focus of the majority of the pictures we're going to look at are from Northern Ireland, mostly from Belfast, but quite often also in Derry, right on the border in the western part of Northern Ireland.
Exactly. So it's actually important just to remind that currently, and actually we're also reminded because of Brexit, that at the moment there is no border that exists between Ireland and Northern Ireland. So you can drive right across the border. There's no stopping. There's no customs posts. There's no passport check. And this is what has existed since, well, in general, since free border has occurred since the Good Friday Agreement, which was signed in 1998 on Good Friday.
So, but kind of jumping back a little bit, we're going to start off with the work of John Hind. I've found a group of postcards online that I thought I'd show you a few of. David, maybe you can explain a little bit before we get to the actual work that's in the show.
So John Hind created this postcard studio, and actually he started work in 1956 selling postcards at Shannon Airport, which had just opened. And his target was American tourists who were visiting Ireland en masse for the first time, because I mean the jet age allowed them to come quite easily. And so they made these photographs, and he actually had a studio in outside Dublin in Droege. That's where he lived. And actually it was in Bray, actually just near where this photograph was taken. Actually, that's near where his studio actually existed. And he did well over 500 photographs of Ireland and many photographs from around the world. He was very particular, and he had a studio, and the photographers would go out to, sometimes they would take one photograph per day, and they would often work on the photographs. They would often make the sky look blue because, you know, in Ireland, it only rains occasionally, but here the photographs will always have blue skies. And so actually one thing that we have done is we've worked with the Photographers Gallery in London, and these postcards were actually originally done as Ectacolor slides. And we've gone back, we're often working with them to actually recreate large images of these slides. And so that's been quite an enjoyable experience, particularly working with Gemma Barnett, who was working at the Photographers Gallery then. These photographs of Butlins are quite well known, and that's something that actually worked, that Chris Booth worked on quite early on. And these Butlins these were holiday camps throughout the United Kingdom and Ireland, and people would go there for a week's holiday where everything was included: food, song, dance, everything, playgrounds, etc. And it's interesting that although they're no longer in existence, I think we have a photograph of Mosney, which is where there was a camp in Ireland, and actually that's where refugees are housed nowadays when they come to Ireland, unfortunately.
I'm going to move on. So I think what's kind of wonderful about this, well, maybe briefly mention this photo as well.
So this photograph is also by John Hind, and this is actually one of the photographs from Northern Ireland. This is in Portrush, and this was taken prior to the Troubles. And actually, Portrush is where many of our family, I think my mother used to go with her parents on holiday. And this is before 1969, and they would go there for a week's holiday. It was quite a well-known spot with a very nice beach.
And I guess what I love is that there's quite a kind of contemporary feel to these pictures. They don't feel out of place in late 20th and early 21st century landscape photography, partly because they're in colour. And then this kind of really incredible inadvertent sort of political message that comes through with these two we're going to look at now, sort of before and after, as it were.
So these are two photographs of a Kronn Street in Dublin, which is the major thoroughfare just north of the Liffey, the borders of the Liffey, which is the major river that goes through Dublin. And here you see on the photograph on the left, which was taken prior to March 8th, 1966, is Nelson's column. And actually Nelson's column in Dublin preceded Nelson's column in Trafalgar Square in London. And this column was a major tourist attraction in Ireland. It was called the Pillar colloquially. And you could actually walk up there and have this wonderful view over Dublin. And, you know, it's surprising that when I was reading accounts of it recently, that it's surprised that it lasted until 1966. But on the evening of the 8th of March, it was actually blown up by the IRA. And parts of it are to be found throughout the country. This is, of course, a photograph taken somewhat later. And you see, obviously, the column is gone. There is now a spire in that place. To the left, you see the building which is called the GPO, General Post Office, which was an important site during the Easter Rising of 1916, where the leaders of the Rising barricaded themselves into the building, which was later attacked by the Helga, the gunboat, which blew up part of the structure.
And, you know, highly topical in relation to current debates over monuments in the US.
Exactly.
So from there, that's early mid-60s. We're going to go straight into the photojournalism that's in the exhibition and in your collection. And it's a little bit later, shot in the late 70s, early 80s, but I wanted to start with this one. Well, I guess because there are photographers in the shot, it just seemed like a great place to start.
Yes, I mean, there was often a photo call. It seemed like there was sort of quite a seduction there. the IRA would come on parade and the photographers would be there waiting with their cameras. These photographs are by Eric Luke, who's a contemporary photographer. He lives actually in Dublin, and he worked for the Irish Press, and he did this wonderful series of photographs, which we found through work with my friend Mark Reston. And so these are a few of the photographs which are now in the exhibition. It's quite sensational, really.
Yeah, as someone growing up, myself growing up in the 80s in the UK, this was, you know, fairly typical of the kind of imagery we got kind of used to seeing in the press.
Yes, yes.
And so for me, it's remarkable that you made the decision to start going back to those photographers who were press photographers and essentially commissioning prints of this work for posterity, really.
Exactly. Well, that's good. It's good to have these, and I think that's an important element of the collection, is to go back and actually to talk with the photographers about what happened during this time. We actually tried to find out who the other photographers were in the shot. We didn't know. Eric didn't know at the time.
And as you mentioned, there's a strong theme of children in the collection as well.
I was actually, when I saw this photograph, I was thinking, see no evil, hear no evil, but actually here they're trying to shield their faces so they won't be identified if the photograph is published in paper. Which
again, I find, yeah, extraordinary that the power of the press is so evident, especially for children of such a young age.
Exactly.
And they're you know, essentially playing amongst burning trucks in the background.
What's interesting about this photograph, this is later in the Troubles, and these children would have grown up in the Troubles throughout, so they were born during the Troubles. So that's what they've experienced. So it feels like almost unnatural, unfortunately, which is unnatural.
And so, here, seeing two photographers who came in from elsewhere to photograph, which I think right from the beginning of, you know, from the late 60s, you had a lot of photojournalists coming in from abroad. Seems like France in particular, actually.
Yes.
So Ian Berry,
so this
British photographer.
Yeah, no, this is a very interesting photograph of a child, and this is an important part of Belfast. And what's very interesting, besides the gun, is that the fact that you see all these buntings in the street, and that's quite evident still when you drive around Northern Ireland in cities which are quite loyalist or Protestant, that there are flags, English flags, you know, flying everywhere almost, and they've been, you know, maintaining their loyalty to the crown in a way. The next photograph is of an Orange Order. You know, this is a member of the Orange Order, and he's wearing what they call a collarette. It's actually an orange, and he's wearing a bowler hat, which is, you know, again, it's fealty to London, to the Stock Exchange. The bowler hat is sort of emblematic of what they're wearing. So they march with the bowler hats and the collarettes, which is in orange. And we're now approaching the marching season, which reaches its peak around July 12th, and commemorates or recognizes the Battle of the Boyne of 1690.
Yeah, we realized the other day, I mean, we just, it's in a way you can't emphasize enough. We're talking about history being kept alive and celebrated that is, you know, close to 400 years old.
Yes, well, 1690, that represents the Battle of the Boyne between William III, William of Orange, and James II, who was the Catholic king. So that's what happened at that site, and this is recognized.
We're going to keep going. So Ian Berry again.
Ian Berry again, children again. It just seems, you know, they're enjoying themselves. And here we actually have this occurred around the time of the funeral of Bobby Sands. He was one of the hunger strikers, and sort of they're just there playing, not really being aware of what actually is going on. But it seems, you know, remarkable. The next photograph is even more remarkable, in that we have a child who's trying to joust with the army, I think, and he's out, you know, not on a horse, but he's out to get somebody. It's quite a remarkable photograph.
In each of these cases so far, you're working directly with the photojournalists.
Yes, it was actually, we actually had worked, I had a long conversation with Ian by Zoom last year, and we were able to discuss how his time in Northern Ireland, and he was helpful in making the selection of photographs which we have now in the collection.
A few more by Ian as well.
Again, this photograph is early in the Troubles, in the early 70s, prior to Bloody Sunday, and the army was seen as protectors, and they would sort of show off their goods. And here's in the Protestant section, they're playing. Children are playing with a helmet and a truncheon. In the next photograph, which is later, actually in the 81, the second time that it came to Northern Ireland, and here you're in the Catholic side, and you have boys sort of looking at Molotov cocktails, which are being held by the IRA. I mean, another remarkable photograph. This seems like a photo session to me.
Yeah, what I also find remarkable is the fact that you've got a photographer who's on both sides, and that was kind of common at that time. Was able to get access to both sides.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah, this is also a very interesting sequence of photographs done by Ian. And actually, what was very interesting, what he mentioned was that the sergeant of this battalion, had seen him before, I think in the Congo, and so he allowed him to tag along as this sort of demonstration occurred. And here you see this sort of remarkable charge that occurs with the army as they sort of subdue some of the demonstrators that occur. This is an early in the Troubles where they actually we were talking about stone throwers, and so before it really got out of control in a way.
And to be really clear, these are British troops. I guess it would be almost the equivalent of the National Guard.
Yes, and Ian also mentioned that at the time that he presented these photographs to the newspapers in London, that they would not print these photographs at the time.
Yeah, so it's that kind of early period where, in a way, in Britain, press are trying to figure out what position they can take on this, with the British government. More by Ian.
Exactly, night and day. Sort of looking at a sequence of time. So I like to look at how things change over time, and you saw the evidence. I like the idea of how you show time in a static image, so showing night and day, or longer periods of time, as you saw with the O'Connell Street photographs by John Hind earlier on. So here you see what's changing between the night and the day, and quite often, which is very remarkable, is there seems to be a bonfire going on somewhere at some time in these photographs. A lot of times there's bonfires going on, people dancing around, demonstrations, that seems to be like in the middle of the street, they would burn a car or something like that. There's always something like this sort of demonstration that was going on quite frequently.
Yeah, you used the word action a lot the other day.
Yeah, days of action. So here's another sequence done by Bruno Barbet, who's a French-Swiss photographer. And we actually got to work with him. Unfortunately, he passed away late last year. And this is from the Battle of Outside, and you see the youth about to attack the guards. You see, it's just quite a remarkable sequence. And this is sort of interesting. This sequence is interesting because there must have been other photographers at the same location, because there's also a sequence by Don McCullum which looks quite similar, but slightly different in how it was taken, with a little wider angle. But this is a key photograph in terms of sequence for the Troubles.
Yeah, I've noticed that as well. It's quite common, not just here, but in other conflicts, where you see the similar moment or the exact same moment in time, but from different angles.
Yeah,
it just comes to mind the famous Tank Man picture from Tiananmen Square, 1989, yes. And there are at least 3 different photographs by different photographers in the same building, just from slightly different angles, but slightly different lenses, zooms. But what's interesting is that same moment, and the image is kind of burned in all of our memories, even though it's not exactly the same position. The sentiment is there.
So these are 2 photographs by Chris Steele Perkins, And what's interesting, we're just getting a sense of how people lived in the Troubles here, which is sort of, you know, just hanging out in a way. And here, you know, it's sort of bizarre. And actually, there was a spread in the Times, actually in London, just a couple of weeks of his photographs, and this photograph was in that series as well. It was actually quite interesting in that I met Chris at Photo London. Actually, we were just chatting because he was there to sign a book, and I started chatting to him about his time in Northern Ireland, and then it was an opportunity to work with him through the Photographers Gallery. And that was one of the first photographers we made quite a large selection from for the collection. There's another bonfire, and it just seems so banal, but here the scene is sort of repeated on this sort of scene with the army and the gun has been done by many photographers, Philip Griffith Jones. Many similar sort of scenes that are portrayed of the Troubles. Another bonfire in the middle of the street. And here you have stone throwing kid. And actually, I don't know how it occurred, but a lot of times the children were throwing stones. I mean, it just seemed that they were days of action with rock throwing. There's another remarkable photograph by Christian Perkins, which is not in the sequence, of like the whole band of children just attacking an RUC vehicle.
More by Chris.
More by Chris, yeah. More bonfires. More days of action.
And have most of the photographers been relatively receptive to your interest in acquiring prints of this work? Have they understood your intention or interest?
Yes, I think we spent quite a lot of time talking with the photographers. Actually, I had a meeting yesterday with Ed Cashew, so that was another photographer we were hoping to add to the collection. And so, yeah, no, it's been very important to have those dialogues, to learn about the processes of how they were there, when they were there, you know, who they met, who helped them out when they were there. That is sort of interesting to hear that story, because it's an ongoing dialogue that we're learning more about. Here's Gilles Perez, of course, who spent a lot of time in Ireland.
Yeah, I think a good person to talk to and maybe spend a little bit of time on, just because the work he shot became so important as evidence.
Exactly, for the Bloody Sunday Tribunal. So that's really important. And this is a funeral for a child that was killed during the Troubles. It's quite haunting. I think that you have photographs afterwards of the children, sort of really drawn. Gilles is, he's very well known for his work in the Troubles, and he's just published his magnus opus, Whatever You Say, Say Nothing, which was just published by Steidl.
Which is it's an extraordinary, I mean, the work, you see the depth and the amount of time he spent there, and the closeness to his subjects. I think he's a particularly important photographer in relation to this, again, because he was coming in from abroad, and perhaps had an ability to approach it in the way that if he was from Ireland or from even from Britain, he would had a different relationship with the place.
Yes, exactly.
And perhaps accept it in a different way.
Mm-hmm.
By days there.
He's gone back many times, and he's gone back more recently as well to Northern Ireland. So it's an ongoing dialogue, I think.
So the last few from the photojournalism.
So this is Gilles Kronn, and this was 1969. And actually, unfortunately, I just realizing that unfortunately he died the following year in Cambodia. But these are some remarkable photographs of this sort of action and building collapsing in Belfast. And again, just the next photograph is even more sort of remarkable. Sort of burning. I think it's a policeman may have been attacked by a Molotov cocktail. So just a remarkable scene.
So we're going to almost move on. Last photographer who really relates to kind of direct.
So this is
documentation of the Troubles.
Yeah. So this is work by Tony O'Shea, and this is from his series Border Roads, which is done between 1990 and 1994. And if you notice that we showed you the border, but there's over 500 crossing points of the border. And before Good Friday Agreement, many of the roads were closed. So they were called the unapproved roads, and they were barricaded, and you can see the barricade there in this photograph. And these roads divided communities because, you know, it was for so long before 1921, it was one country. It was all part of the United Kingdom, but it was all one. And it was after 1921 that the divide occurred. And of course, now the border is fully open. But in this time, we're seeing what happens, you know, on this border road. And it's interesting that there would be sort of a day of action where the community would come together to actually remove the barricade. And here you see the photographs before the barricade, and they would come in with heavy instrument, like, you know, diggers and things like that to help them remove the barricades. And it seemed like the community would get involved, and these are major projects. Here they're removing the stones, being in a forklift truck, being in a digger, you know, just whatever it takes to remove the stones so that they can actually remove the barricade that exists across the border. And then, you know, once the border was actually opened up, here's a major action going on here. They would sometimes have a little parade, and here's more of those. They're really working at it.
There's incredible sense of community in these pictures.
Exactly. Everybody's in on the act, so to speak. And
so Tony was less of a photojournalist and more there to document, would you say?
Yes. Yeah, he also worked, he was a photojournalist as well, actually. I think he worked. And here you see, once the road was open, you'll see that they would cycle through, and then they would have the drum majorettes come through with a little parade to celebrate the opening of the border road. A few days later, the border road would be closed again, but at least there was some success. And they would have a parade, or they would have somebody would come and talk about the border, etc. So this was a frequent occurrence during this time before the actual Good Friday Agreement.
So we're going to move on to the last few artists whose work really begins to, I suppose, reflect on the Troubles and move into the post-Troubles period.
Mm-hmm. Actually, now we're looking at photographs by Rosalind Solomon. So these are actually, Rosalind went to photograph children in the Troubles, and actually that's why she went. She lives actually in New York. And actually, I've been in touch with Rosalind, and I was sort of asking her what it was like to be there when she was in Belfast. And she gave me this entry from her journal: British soldiers everywhere, firearms lifted and ready to fire, walking backwards, walking forwards, helicopter blades whirling. Word has it, there'll be riots in Belfast tomorrow. Almost every family has a relative who has been wounded or killed. Nola Mary's toddler was stoned by thugs as he played. They sleep in 4-hour shifts, watching for the petrol bombs which are pitched at their house. At 32, Noel is prematurely grey. He has been imprisoned 3 times. So it just gives you some idea of what's going on, the backstory behind some of these photographs.
Again, that word action.
Yes, it's action, days of action. The other thing is that you still see joy, and then, you know, children really, despite what's going on, being able to enjoy themselves. And here he has painted on glass. It's just really, you know, it's remarkable.
So yeah, so now we are going to move into work that responds and is, you know, moving from the kind of reactive form of photography of documenting the moments before, during, and after action, conflict. But this work is really made possible by the passing of time, and in fact, in this case, really represents the representation of time.
So this series is by David Farrell, who's a contemporary photographer who lives in Dublin and actually teaches in Dublin photography. And these are from the disappeared. And this is a sort of a tricky situation. Some of the informers of the IRA, if they were in the community, the IRA would have sometimes they would be murdered, and then they were buried in unmarked graves in Ireland. And it's only since the since the Good Friday Agreement that they come back and have been able to identify where the bodies are actually buried. And here you have a digger coming in this field in County Meath, looking for the bodies. The family, after being pointed out that there may be that one of the loved ones is buried there, they'd come by and put a miraculous medal on this tree. And this was noted by David, and he came back over a period of about 15 years actually. And here you have, this is also called the swallowing tree, where the medal has been swallowed over a sequence of time. So we're showing 6 photographs out of a sequence of about 12 photographs, and you'll see that over time, if you look carefully, that the miraculous medal is being swallowed by the tree. You'll see it in the center where you see the tree is actually enveloping it. So again, showing the passage of time. After the sequences of photographs were taken and the family believing that their loved one was buried in one field, they actually they found the body in another field, not across the road. So
And now, perhaps one of the best known contemporary.
So this
Irish
photographs,
artists.
three photographs by Donovan Wiley, and in a way looking at architecture of conflict. And so the 3 photographs here from different series. This is the British Watchtower series. So these are watchtowers which existed in Northern Ireland during the Troubles, and they sort of almost like castles overlooking the land, sort of controlling the land. They were surveilling the people below what was happening, looking and listening to what was happening, trying to find out if something was about to happen. So these existed around, these fortifications almost occurred around Northern Ireland during the Troubles.
Yeah, I mean, it still kind of blows my mind that this was, or this was shot in 2005, but these existed with, listening equipment, video equipment, like really, extraordinarily powerful equipment to surveil the local population. Exactly. And to be, to watch, but also make it very clear that they were watching you.
Exactly. This is an early watchtower, not watchtowers, but they're this is from Greenland, sort of
kind of early warning system.
Early warning systems, yes, exactly. And then the next one is from Kandahar province in Afghanistan, and also these are outposts. And actually, once they decommissioned the watchtowers, some of the materials were used in the outposts by the British Army here in Kandahar province, again to surveil. So this was actually commissioned by the Imperial War Museum.
And very loosely making a
flag,
Irish flag, 3 colours.
And so finally, just to round it off, because the exhibition was done during COVID, I couldn't really have anybody take my photographs, so I took a self-portrait of me in PPE, and this is how I would see my patients last year. Okay.
So I guess I'll stop sharing my screen now.
We have some questions.
Thank you. So yeah, everyone should have the ability now to unmute yourself if you'd like to jump in for a question, or again, feel free to put them into the chat, and Evan can read them and get them addressed.
So I'll get started with a few while people collect their thoughts. Going right back to the first slides you showed, John Hind is new to me. Are those images something that you kind of had to dig out of obscurity, or is it something that many Irish people would be aware of and know? And where were all those color slides archived? Where did you get the source material for Photographers Gallery to print them?
So the Hind archive, I mean, the photographs are well known around Ireland. The archive exists in just outside London, and they control all the archive. What happened, they've actually gone initially back to print some of the extra colors. And if you look on the Photographers Gallery site and actually look up John Hind, you can see that large images of some of the famous postcards are available now for sale. And what we did is we worked with the archive to actually select more images from Ireland. It was actually quite interesting because it turns out that these, unfortunately, Technicolor photographs were not stored properly, and a lot of them had deteriorated. So some of the classic photographs were not actually possible to bring back. And so we actually almost found out what actually was available. So we started off with all the photographs of Ireland, and we have about 40 photographs. There were some they were too far gone in terms of the original Technicolor. And then we selected images of Northern Ireland as well to round off the series. And we have about another 15 images of Northern Ireland. Again, it was sort of going to pick as many as we could that were actually available. They're actually unfortunately continuing to deteriorate. So this has also seemed quite urgent to create this archive. So now we have quite a large series of these photographs. But they are now, since we've done all this work, the archive is actually now selling some of these photographs, and they're available.
So is the archive privately owned, or it's part of an institution, or?
I think it's privately owned.
But again, what I love is that it represents David's proactive approach to collecting of moving beyond what's offered to you by a gallery and going as much as possible to the source material when it's not available through a gallery, or where the gallery allows you to kind of have that relationship with the estate or with the artist directly. I find particularly exciting.
I mean, one of my favorite projects along the same lines is that Bound for Glory exhibition and book that was the discovered color slides of the FSA photographers that were in the Library of Congress. And, everybody knows the image in our heads of the FSA photographers is all black and white. But when that series came out that showed that they worked in color, and that the contemporaneous prints all faded to nothing, but that there were these beautiful color slides that showed that, photographers of the time were absolutely thinking in color. Seeing this John Hind archive makes me wonder how many times in how many different parts of the world is that trope repeated, and that, I mean, maybe they're known locally, but they're certainly not known internationally. So I think it's a really interesting bit of scholarship.
Yeah, and then actually there's also a series of early Irish photographs which have been colorized actually recently. That's another book that's been produced. So these photographs are being worked on, especially since we have digital access to many things now, and they can be manipulated and reproduced to look even better than they were at the time almost.
So Casey asked, how did you find the photojournalists that you collected? Was there a method to finding work, or was it work that you already, or did you just look into photographers about which you already knew?
Well, some of it came. Some of the source material came from Magnum Ireland, which was a show that was held in the 80s, late early 90s actually. And Gemma Barnett, who worked at the photography gallery, had actually worked at Magnum, and she made access to as many of these photographers possible. So we started off. That was how we started. And she also gained us access to Donovan, and Donovan helped me with Jill. So it was sort of almost like one thing led to another. There's a series of connections which occur, and that's generally how I work. And then somebody will come to me with some suggestions, and a meeting may occur. So it's serendipitously it occurs, and I don't know exactly how it's going to occur. But then now that I'm in the project is quite involved, we sort of go even deeper, exploring what actually has been done during the Troubles. So it's an ongoing sort of mission in a way to find out more about who's worked during the Troubles and what's been produced, to sort of give a sort of a balanced approach to what photographs were taken. And this is sort of in a way, Emma described it as a living archive of the Troubles too, because we're working with photographers who are living and trying to get access to some of their work. So I think that seems to be quite an important project at this time.
I think that's important to mention as well, that you, I suppose, are approaching this as a private collector, but with the knowledge that it will eventually go to a public collection, and therefore perhaps you approach the choices you make about which pictures to acquire may be slightly different because you have that knowledge in mind.
Yeah, well, I guess one way of looking at it is that I tend not to buy just one photograph, but I would tend to look at the whole series of work and then buy a selection of photographs, which to think about potentially of an exhibition in the future. So that has occurred. And like with Tony O'Shea, we bought several of his photographs. I think we bought about 50 photographs at this point, so that we can mount different forms of exhibitions from his work.
Do you get a lot of input from Emma, or are they just happy to sort of trust your eye?
They trust my eye, and I tend to work independently because I'm focusing on I tend to look with my eye in terms of how I'm collecting. So the things that interest me in terms of children, and so that when that's involved, that sort of becomes a way that I enter the conversation, looking at how maybe children, or that's one entree, but there's other entrees, and I think just opportunities that arise, and people will come to me with some ideas, and when I'm in Ireland, my friend Amelia Steen, she will introduce me to other photographers. So I've had the opportunity to meet a lot of photographers in Ireland and see what they've done, and we've purchased different bodies of work from different photographers, not just on the Troubles, but also of Ireland's contemporary status. That's ongoing.
We've got a question here from Pauline, who says, "Thank you, David. Bravo for putting together this outstanding collection and exhibition. I see that Rosalind is here and would love to ask her to tell us about that photograph she took of a Belfast child. That's part of the collection. Is that okay to take a moment?
That's perfectly fine, and we'd be happy to hear from Rosalind.
Great. Rosalind, are you here?
Okay.
Oh, there she is.
It's very simple. There were a number of children who were dressed up. They had been at some kind of a party. And I just happened to stop this boy and got his picture. I was very excited about it. So I was interested when I went to Belfast in the beginning. I had read some of, I think it's Robert Cole, the sociologist, and and he wrote about children and trauma and war. And so I was interested in photographing children because I thought, the kinds of experiences that they were having said a lot.
Great.
Thank you so much.
I have Pauline. Pauline actually wrote a wonderful essay for the catalogue, and I'm looking forward to seeing her in the near future.
Thank you. Yes, it's good to see you here, and thank you so much. This is really a beautiful conversation.
Thank you.
So we have a question from Linda. As a pediatrician and collector, are you interested in photography of children beyond Ireland? Any particular bodies of work? Well, I know the answer to that, but the basic answer is yes. And previous shows that were at IMA do highlight that, but I'll let David answer first.
Yeah, so I mean, the photographs of children is a major theme in the collection, and we have many photographs. We worked. Kenneth Josephson was just one person comes to mind. We have many photographs of Matthew. We have photographs by Diane Arbus. We have. I'm just thinking there's a lot. There's photographs from Russia. There's photographs from Japan. Yeah, there's many things. Too many to
Callahan.
Yeah, Callahan. Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, PGH Photo Speaker Series has had another collector, Joe Baio, who also focuses on children and teens. And I think you always know when you have a good subject when multiple collectors can approach the topic and share virtually none of the same pictures. Joe's collection looks nothing like David's, and David's looks nothing like Joe's, and they're both great collections, and they both generally have the same approach, and yet they find completely different things. It's remarkable to look at them individually and comparatively, because it's such an endlessly rich idea.
Actually, I wanted to show you this. This is the cover of the first book, which was called Out of the Dark Room. This is photographed by Kenneth Josephson. But actually, what's interesting is this came from Joe Bio's collection.
Oh,
Because he had deaccessioned some of his work, some of his collection at one point. So there's a connection there.
The little fun aside with Joe deaccessioning is that when he had the chance, he bought some of those pictures back again.
So there's always a story.
There's always a story, exactly. So Hannah asked, will all of these photographs be given to the museum?
Yes, but over time they will be given. I mean, we're not museums. A lot of these photographs now reside in Ireland, but the museum can borrow them easily. So a lot of the actual collection now is moving to Ireland over time, where the museum can actually borrow them easily. But some of the photographs we're giving directly to the museum, and that's what we've been doing over the years. So eventually they'll all go.
Yeah, it's a remarkable relationship between a private collector and a public institution. It's not unheard of, but it's quite rare, as both you and Tristan know, as well as the many lifetime curators who are signed in will also know.
Yeah, I'm wondering as well how representative of sort of universal themes of humanity are represented in the Irish elements of the collection, David. You know, we talked about children, but community really comes across in a lot of those pictures as well, not just in Tony O'Shea's work, but actually just almost incidentally in the photojournalism in a way, when you've got people living a daily life just side by side, the military on street corners.
Yeah, we worked on that, and actually we worked on a little bit on that theme in Ireland itself, contemporary Ireland, particularly looking at new immigrants to Ireland. Looking at some bodies of work by other photographers that are living in Ireland at this time. So I'm continuing to look at new work that's been done in Ireland that to add to the collection, and also that relates to what all exists from the collection from around the world.
I thought it all as I was looking through all of them that all history is contemporary. Perhaps neither of you are, or none of us are old enough to go back far enough to remember this, but it is a remarkable transformation in the society to get to a place where a soldier with a machine gun in a sandbagged machine gun nest is so unremarkable that a child can hang out in front of it, eating an ice cream cone, right?
Exactly.
And so I start to think, well, where's the turning point that suddenly, like at some point that must have been remarkable, that people were like, what the hell? Why are there, all these people with guns? And, I think about the division here in the US, and I think, is the feeling in 1925 Ireland what it feels like in 2021 US, that we haven't gotten there yet, but it's on the road to being completely comfortable with people having armed guns and defended positions that they say, this is mine, not yours. I don't know, but it feels very universal to me.
Yeah, and history keeps on repeating itself in a way in different locations. So there's always something, although it's local, it's universal.
Looks like Mari's got her hand up. Do you want to jump in?
Thank you, Casey. Yes, I had a question about perhaps the objects that weren't given directly to the museum. I know sometimes when collectors have objects in their home and they then give it to a museum, that seeing it on the wall in a gallery sort of makes it feel like it's a completely different object or a completely different relationship to the object. And so I was wondering whether of any of the photographs that weren't given directly to the museum, whether they lived with you, and whether seeing them in the museum or on display in the gallery felt different at all.
Well, first of all, I haven't. Well, the unfortunate thing is I actually haven't seen the exhibition in person, so I have to imagine it. I've lived with some of the photographs on the walls. A lot of them I haven't, because a lot of the photographs came more recently to the collection, and they were we acquired them over the last few years with the idea that they would go into the exhibition. So some of them I haven't really lived with, but it was quite remarkable to work with Sean Tristan, who's a curator, to create these sort of grids of work to represent to show how we would sort of look at the work in this context. What's also interesting about the show is that we try not to have any identifiable. Sean consciously decided not to have any identifiable figures from the Troubles. There's no photographs of Jerry Adams, no photographs of Ian Paisley, to make it more universal. And I think that's important. And I think this show is occurring, and I was talking to Sean last week, it feels more urgent because we now, after January 1st, we're now actually living in Brexit. So Brexit has actually occurred, and it's starting to have effects on Northern Ireland at the moment. So it is actually, there's sort of demonstration saying no border in the Irish Sea. And that's actually a very scary idea. And, what's happened before could happen again. And that's really, really concerning. So I think we have to be reminded of what happened before, because it just, history does repeat itself. And I think it's important to recognize this and what it was like. Since the children of the Troubles now, we're talking about the Good Friday Agreement of 1998, so that's over 22, 23 years ago. So most children will not have known what it was like to live with the Troubles at this point. So it's not a living memory for them.
In fact, Donovan Wiley's making work on that theme of...
Exactly, yes. So he's looking at it now again. So it's scary. It's scary.
Well, perhaps that is a dark but appropriate place to finish up. I've just put in a link in the chat to the IMA site that has David's show, and I'm also going to remind everyone of insightproject.com, which is Tristan.
Oh, the other thing actually to mention is actually on the IMA site, the exhibition actually exists as a virtual exhibition. So you actually can go and look at the exhibition yourself and actually walk through it virtually. So it's actually available as online as an exhibition at this time at ima.ie. So you can actually see it again and go through the photographs more carefully if you'd like.
And it is not insightreject.com. Autofill is not helping me here, but I think this will, yes, there we go. So you have two quick links to copy if you all would like. Casey, any sum up or future events, and we'll say goodnight?
Yeah, well, thank you again, Tristan and David. That was great. For everyone, we'd love to invite you to our next event, which is August 11th. It's a collector show and tell. If you are someone who has a photograph that you're passionate about, that you want to talk about, it's a great chance for you to participate. We do have applications open through the end of today, so I'll put into the chat the link for that right now, so you can jump in, and we don't ask for too much info, just an image, a little description about what you'd want to talk about, and you'd have just a couple of minutes to share. So we did that last year. It was really great.
It was very, very fun and successful. Just a quick overview. David, you participated in that, didn't you?
Pardon?
You participated in our first collector show and tell, didn't you?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I did very much.
So we've had some great entries. We'd love to see a few more, see who we can squeeze in. And then, what's that?
Exactly.
Yeah, and then we've got one more speaker series event with Isolde Brielmeier on September 15th. So we'll have signups for those events to attend out shortly, and just follow us on social media or sign up for our email list to get those dates.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Tristan. Thank you, David. Wonderful.
Thank you. Thank you, Evan.
See what you're doing.
Casey, thank you very much.
To hear your
Everybody.
thoughts.
Thank you once again.
Thanks, everybody.